Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first webinar or workshop from the 3-workshop series this summer, June 2026, called Be the One. Be the one consistently responsive co-parent in your child's life during interparental conflict or separation, divorce, or post-divorce. My name is Mihaela. I am a certified parenting educator. I am also an author. This is my book on conscious parenting for young children. I am also a Florida Supreme Court certified family mediator, and I have been in education for 30 years, all the way from K to higher ed, which means college students. So I've met students in all phases of their educational progression, from kindergarten to college graduates, and that's how I know the impact of what's happening at home on learning, development, creativity, and courage to go out in the world and do great things, which is what all parents want from their children, or for their children, I should say. So today we are going to learn about your child's brain and what's the impact of ongoing interparental conflict on the developing child, your child, that is. It doesn't matter how old your child is. It doesn't matter if your child is maybe even an adult child at this time. You should still watch this workshop because you can still do repair in your relationship. However, this class is particularly customized for parents with young and adolescent children. So young means 0 to 12, adolescent children means 12 to 18 and beyond. But after 18, 19, we consider that human a young adult. So stay till the end. This is about an hour and 15 minutes. This is the type of video that you should be watching, sitting down, watching your computer, having a notepad next to you and a pen, a glass of water, maybe a cup of tea. This is not the type of video that you watch while running or being on the treadmill, okay? It's important. It's relevant to you and your family, and it can help you tremendously reconsider the way you approach the relationship that you're having right now with the other parent, which most probably is your ex, and you are now in a co-parenting situation, relationship, post-separation, and things are not going as well, and that's why you're here. So let's get into it. I have 18 slides. Like I said, this is the type of video that you are watching when you have the time to sit down, to listen, to pause, to take notes, to write things down, so you can learn from it. It's not an entertainment video, okay? I'm super happy that you're here. Let's get into it. Okay, so like I said, we're focusing today on your child's brain and understanding the impact on your child's developing brain when there is ongoing interparental conflict. Remember, there are 2 more workshops coming up, one next week and one the following week. So if you look on slide number 1, right here on this image, the key brain structures affected by chronic stress in your child's developing brain are the prefrontal cortex, also shortly named PFC, which is the thinking brain, we call this, right? It's right here, the prefrontal cortex of a child. This is the part of the brain that helps a child make good decisions. It helps the child stay focused on a task, both at home and in the classroom. It helps a child have impulse control over his impulse to hit somebody, for example, or maybe he feels the need to go to the bathroom. He can tell you, I need to go to the bathroom, instead of just not being able to control that. This is the part of the brain where the child can regulate to some degree their explosive emotions, like anger, for example. A lot of parents make the mistake of blaming the child for not being able to have this impulse control, wise decision-making ability when the child is dysregulated due to psychological and emotional reasons in the child's environment. And that's why this workshop is so important. So, key brain structures affected by chronic stress are the prefrontal cortex, which is the ongoing developing, thinking, rational part of a human brain, which is right here. And this continues to develop all the way till we're 25, 26, 27, and 28. A second key area affected by stress is amygdala. The amygdala in the brain is what we know as the threat detection center. So the amygdala, you can think of it as an antenna. Just like an antenna or a radio frequency is scanning the environment to pick up on signals for potential threats, be it real threat or just perceived threat. The amygdala is also responsible for stress hormone like cortisol being deployed in the body if the child decides that he needs to protect himself by running away, hiding away, making himself invisible. So the amygdala, which is either always on or is only on when it has to be on, makes a huge difference in the ability of the child to self-regulate. The amygdala and the prefrontal cortex, they work in tandem. When the amygdala feels safe, not threatened, then the prefrontal cortex of the child is able to think rationally, to have discernment, to make decisions, to have impulse control. So these two things are, I would ask you to think as like right hand and left hand. They work in tandem, they work as a team, but one can hijack the other, which means the amygdala, if it's always on because of unpredictability and tension in the house, then the child has no resources left for the rational discernment type of thinking. Okay. Hippocampus, that's another key structure area in the brain. This is where memory is being formed, where learning takes place, and where stress hormone regulation takes place. Again, stress hormone is typically cortisol and adrenaline. Too much of stress hormone in the child's body means inability to self-regulate. As simple as that. And then we have what's called the cingulate cortex, which is the emotional processing, attention, and conflict monitoring. They're all connected as a big system. Just remember two things, left hand, right hand. Let's just use this metaphor, right? The prefrontal cortex, the rational discernment-based thinking cannot take place when the amygdala, which is the fear center, the threat center, is highly activated. In an environment with high conflict between parents, The amygdala is always highly activated, which means there is a constant flood of cortisol and adrenaline in the child's blood system, which means the child cannot think right. He or she cannot listen to us, they cannot follow instructions, and they cannot do well in school. And many times parents misinterpret that for bad behavior. Okay, this was a lot for just slide one. Let's move on. What's the landscape in United States right now? Well, we know that around 1 million plus children in the US, based on a 2020 peer-reviewed article. So that's a long time ago. It's more than 15 years data. We can safely guess that this is only higher now, but based on a 2010 study, more than 1 million children in the US experience parental separation each year. A study in 2009 tells us that about 50% of American youth will experience parental divorce during childhood. So we already knew this statistic, which says that in the United States, more than half of marriages end up in divorce. And as most marriages have children, then we know that more than half families in the United States of America are raising children in a co-parenting setup. More than 25% of divorcing families involve high sustained conflict levels. This is based on a 2026 study. And please remember, most of high conflict post-separation co-parenting victims, which is typically one of the two co-parents, do not self-report. So if 25% is being reported, we can safely assume that this percentage is much higher. So more than 25% of divorcing families involve high sustained conflict levels. And yet another statistic, 40% of first marriages in the US end in divorce. We now know this is more than 50%. And the other piece to this statistic now is that around 65% of second marriages end in divorce. That's all to say that the institution of marriage is having a PR crisis, is not working the way the marriage is being institutionalized in our culture right now. But this is not a cultural workshop, so let's focus on what can we do as parents and co-parents to help our children who may be in the middle and paying the price of the high conflict co-parenting relationship. Okay. Let's make a critical distinction. It is not the divorce that hurts the child, it's the conflict. So I'm going to say this again. It is not the divorce itself that hurts a child. Of course, the divorce is always a painful experience for any child of any age. However, what's hurting the child, what impedes a child's development is not the divorce itself, it's the conflict between parents that's happening during the divorce and post-divorce. So, from a study in 2024 in Family Science Review, we read the following: continuing conflict between parents underlies the developmental problems most often experienced by children whose parents divorce. The divorce itself is a structural family change that children can adapt to with adequate support. And to the opposite of that, the ongoing conflict between the parents is an active stressor that continuously disrupts brain development and security. When we say security in this context, we refer to a perceived and felt sense of psychological safety. So, parents believe that if they put a roof above a child's head and food on the table, so to say, the child is safe and secure and taken care of and protected. And while those measures are absolutely necessary, we don't want a traumatic event such as ending up in a shelter or sleeping outdoors. However, in order for optimal brain development, for optimal learning and personality development, a child needs a lot more. They need a felt sense of safety as a baseline. That shouldn't be the exception, it should be the norm. The felt sense of safety and predictability must be the baseline. I will review quickly what I just said in slide 1 because I feel I went too abruptly into it. But just quick reminders, this is a much clearer slide. The key brain structures affected by chronic stress, and I'm using chronic stress interchangeably with high conflict, ongoing interparental conflict. Okay, so when mom and dad are constantly fighting, either you're still married and you're always in conflict, the two parenting styles are not anywhere close to each other. What mom does, dad comes in and completely overrides it, or the other way around it. One parent undermines the authority of the other parent, or we have a disciplinarian and then we have a Disney type of parent. One parent is in charge of rules and structure and limits, and here comes the other parent at the end of the day and gives ice cream to everybody at 10 p.m. This applies to you too. Even if you're still married, your child is still affected. If you are during divorce or separation or post-separation, this is even more acute in your child's brain because the conflict has been there in the family for many years. It takes a couple between 4 to 6 years to finally file for divorce. So that means that a child had been exposed to the high conflict at least 2, 3, 4, 5 years before ending up in court system. So these areas had been affected already, but now that that divorce is happening, if we have a high conflict parent who is making the divorce even harder, using the children as pawns to be vindictive to the other parent, then this is all high alert for the brain. High alert. The amygdala never rests. Okay, so again, the prefrontal cortex, PFC, is the seat of reason, judgment, empathy, emotional regulation. It fully matures around the age of 25. Some studies say 28. So your child is basically an adolescent / young adult still in development till 25. They finish college and they're still not fully developed. And it's highly vulnerable to chronic stress. Amygdala is the brain's alarm system. It detects threats and triggers fight, flight, freeze, or fawn stress responses. It's overactivated by repeated conflict exposure, of course. The antenna, it's like an antenna that constantly picks up threat signals. And hippocampus is where memory is being consolidated, and it's also where learning happens. Excess cortisol, which is the stress hormone, literally shrinks hippocampus, and it impairs memory and learning, long-term memory and short-term memory. This chart is being taken from the National Scientific Council on the Developing Child Working Paper number 18 from Harvard University, published in 2026. It's a free and public article. You can find it on the Center for the Developing Child under Resources, Harvard University. Staying with Harvard research, the Harvard framework for stress is divided in 3 levels. Very easy to understand, very well done. Same working paper 2026. So what researchers are telling us is this: there is positive stress, we call that the green zone. There is tolerable stress, we call that the yellow zone. And then there is toxic stress, we call that the red zone. In the green zone, positive stress, what do we see? This is an example in which your child has homework, for example, and the homework is slightly challenging, is just a tiny bit above their current level of ability. Let's say it's math. So by being exposed to the homework, which feels a little bit hard, but the child is able to do it, maybe with the help of an adult, maybe by reading the textbook, by being able to overcome that moderate challenge, the child is being positively challenged. So there is a benefit to positive stress. If you are an adult, just think of yourself when you went to the gym, maybe for the first time, or maybe after a long time, and you felt that you really couldn't lift more than 30 pounds, right? Let's say 30 pounds, it was your baseline, and you kept going to the gym for a week. And then on day 7, you told yourself, I am going to challenge myself today and lift 40 pounds, 10 pounds heavier. It's not maybe as easy as 30 pounds, but is attainable. So that attainability is now stimulating your muscle to grow a little bit stronger, bigger, and it boosts your self-confidence in your ability to overcome challenges. So in the green zone of positive stress, we don't want things to always be very easy, because that would mean we're always staying flat. There is no growth, no development, but they have to be attainable with slight support for the individual. So this is a brief increase in heart rate and stress hormone. And because it's brief, it's positive. It teaches the child to manage challenges. It's part of normal development, and it happens when a supportive adult is present. Tolerable stress, or yellow or orange zone of stress, is a stronger, longer lasting body and brain alert response. It's time limited. Full recovery is possible with support, and it needs a buffering adult to be present. So let's think about your child and homework again. Let's say your child comes home with an F in math. So this time it's an F. He failed. It's a big deal. It's a big deal for the child. It's a big deal for you, the parent, right? It's a stronger response on the body and on the brain. It's higher level stress. In the beginning, the child may feel, I can't do it. I can't do it. I'm not able to pass, right? It may go into a freeze response or into a fight response. The teacher doesn't know. It's not my fault. Anyway, it's hard to cope with the stressor. But it's short term. It's not an F forever, right? It's short term, it's more intense, and you are helping more. So now the child overcomes. Maybe you in-state tutoring for a month, and now there is a plan. Okay, we're going to have tutoring every week, once a week for the next 4 to 8 weeks. Let's see how it goes. Maybe you talk to the teacher and the teacher gives him 10 extra minutes for testing. So you are intervening, you are doing a bigger, you're coming up with problem solving and interventions that are equivalent to the intensity of the stress. If we think back to the gym example, this would be you. Now you're able to lift 40 pounds, but you know that for high intensity training, you need to be able to do at least one rep of maybe 80 pounds, double the weight, right? In the beginning, you won't be able to do it, but then one day you're going to tell yourself, today's the day when I'm going to try to lift 80 pounds. And you lift 80 pounds one time, one rep, your heart goes from normal to very fast in a second. There is a flood of stress hormone. Your muscle feels it, and then you recover. So this is tolerable stress, and many times it's needed for growth and development as long as the intensity is short-lived, okay? Because if it's intense stress and it's long-term, it's ongoing, intense, we step into the red zone, which the researchers call it toxic stress. Now, what is toxic stress? It's prolonged activation of stress response system. There is no relief. Remember in the yellow zone, when you had to lift the 80 pounds, you knew you only have to lift it once and then drop it, and then you allow your body to recover. There is recovery built in. If your child comes home with an F, you come up with a plan. He is relieved. He knows he will recover from it. But when there is no relief, what happens? It disrupts brain architecture because the amygdala is always on. You're in danger, my child, says the amygdala. So the amygdala says, in order for you to be able to fight or flight, we're going to pump cortisol 24/7. So that weakens the immune system. Kids get sick and sick and sick and sicker. It becomes a metabolic issue. They have no way of regulating their emotions. They become a prey animal. Have you ever seen a gazelle chased by a lion on the savannah? That's the brain of your child. It's a prey animal in constant fighting or flighting. There is no resource left for the brain to recover. And if it cannot recover, it cannot learn and it cannot retain information. Learning has no space to happen. Long-term memory has no space to happen. Ability to focus and attention has no place to happen. You take your child to the doctor, it gets diagnosed with mental health disorders, ADHD, you put them on medication, and you start a vicious cycle that will only interfere with the development of your child's brain. The prefrontal cortex takes a pause. There is no resources left for development of higher level thinking. Okay. Now, why is this relevant to our topic today? Because high conflict divorce is the source of toxic stress for children in this family situation. It is not the fact that mom and dad are divorcing. It's the fact that mom and dad cannot talk to each other like human beings. They cannot agree on a schedule. I am being shuffled from one house to the other without notice. My schedule gets changed overnight because dad has to travel, mom has to work. I'm being left with the babysitter or with the nanny or with the neighbor, or they forget about me for pickup after school, or I'm being left with a family member on one of the sides with whom I have no relationship. All of a sudden, I'm in the house with this person. So the child is experiencing all of this while both parents expect the child to quote unquote adapt. Okay, so Harvard defines toxic stress as prolonged activation of the body's stress response in the absence of a buffering adult relationship. When chronic, it disrupts the developing architecture of the brain, particularly the prefrontal cortex and the hippocampus, which is responsible for memory and learning. So, these are the steps in which toxic stress activates stress hormone production in the body. 1, threat is being perceived. Maybe the child is witnessing parental arguments, hostile communication, miscommunication, threatening communication. The child is being used as a messenger. The child may be threatened by one of the parents. If you love mom, don't ask me for that, or you are just like your father, all kinds of things that happen, right? Step 2, amygdala is being activated. Stress hormones such as cortisol and adrenaline flood the developing brain. When that happens, the prefrontal cortex activity is being suppressed. It shuts down. It stops like a train in a train station. Rational thinking, learning, emotional regulation, they literally go offline. Offline, from light to dark. The switch is off. And chronic repetition means that this cycle happens many times a day. And then it becomes weeks and months and years. We call that chronic repetition. So neural pathways for threat hypervigilance become hardwired over time. So instead of this threat response that the amygdala naturally does to save us from danger, which is a good thing. That's why we survived as a species, right? It comes in automatically and it makes us jump when a car is coming. But when the amygdala is on and the cortisol and the adrenaline are being produced 24/7, the hypervigilance become hardwired in how a child thinks, feels, perceives, how their self-image develops. So they become hypervigilant. They can't pay attention to learning because they're paying attention to being threatened. Now, over time, maybe the threat is not real anymore, or maybe it's less and less. But if this type of family environment happened between 0 to 12, it becomes wired in who the child now is, and we call that personality. Okay, so this is the same working paper, number 18. You can find this on the Center on the Developing Child at Harvard University. I want to quickly review what we call ecological system theory, because I want you to think about your child's experience during your conflict with the other parent, be it still in a marriage, but particularly during a divorce and post-divorce. I want you to understand that one instance in which you are fighting with the other parent for your child is not just one instance. And the divorce itself is not one event. Oh, well, it happened, it's over, everybody's going back to normal now, we're readapting, everything is okay. It's a system upon system upon system upon system, okay? The brain engages and responds and interprets reality and experiences at multiple levels. There are many layers to brain development. For you and me, if we are adults, let's say we're in our 40s, right? And we decide to get a divorce because the marriage is not working out, is not healthy. We can be single or rebuild our lives, we'll be okay. And we think of the divorce as a one life event, and we recover from it because we're adults. But for your child, there is a microsystem in which the divorce happens, right? It's the home, the school, the peer group, the friends, the family, holidays and dinners and play dates. Who's going to the movies now? Are mommy's friends coming, daddy's friends? We're now separating the friend circles. So there's a microsystem that is in direct proximity to your child's life, right? There is then a mesosystem, which is now it goes beyond the family environment. It spills over into school. In other words, your child, he or she, when they go to school every morning and now they're in the classroom with 25 other kids and with teachers and staff and coaches, that those interactions, in those interactions, your child is a different child. It's not the same child as pre-divorce or pre-conflict. Then we have exosystem, or let's call it more plain social, cultural justice level system. Now we have the relationship that your child has with the court system, right? If you have to go to hearings, if you are still going to trial, if your lawyers are still involved, if maybe a guardian ad litem is being involved, who comes home to both homes and does social psycho investigation, interviews, observations. So now your child is part of that system. He or she has that experience that shapes who the child becomes, what their self-image is, and the stress levels. in your child. And then we have a macro system. So we started with micro system at the level of your family nucleus, and we ended up macro system, which means culture, religion, church, society, media. Your child now is interacting with this level, and his self-image is now being shaped by culture, religion, and media. And depending on your child's experiences in the first three systems, microsystem, which means family, and then school system, and then social and justice system, if your child had an adult who could hold him, buffer the experience, guide him, contain, help, support, listen, then your child is going to have a better chance of showing up in the world as a more whole, integrated human being. Okay, so what this model of ecological system applied to divorce, which we can read in Family Science Review by Shelton 2024, says the following: divorce is not a single event. It is a cascade of ecological transitions that restructure every system the child inhabits simultaneously. The microsystem, which means home stability, routines, and parent-child roles are being disrupted during high conflict between parents post-divorce. So the child's most immediate developmental context becomes unreliable. This is what I was saying earlier about schedules being changed last minute, or when the two parents are not able to follow the agreed upon timeshare. When one co-parent, typically the high conflict antagonistic parent, is constantly hijacking the predictability of everyone's life because they are being vindictive to the parent. Typically, they're being vindictive to the parent who filed for divorce. So all of this level of family is being fractured. Then we have a mesosystem breakdown. This is when school gets involved, when communication between teachers and parents is not cohesive anymore, because now the two parents are not one team anymore. They're two divided teams, and the teachers get very confused. They get very frustrated and aggravated. And now the child is paying the price because a teacher has 20 to 30 other students in the classroom. A teacher is not a mediator, is not a psychotherapist. They don't have time for this. So they may intentionally or unintentionally avoid communicating certain things because the teacher just doesn't know who to communicate anymore. So your child is going to pay a price if you and the other co-parent cannot figure this out. And then we have the macro system disruption, that eventually leads to the child not having enough self-confidence, not being able to play, doing sports, showing up, competing, because self-trust comes from safety. Self-trust in a child doesn't come from pressure on performance. It doesn't come from money. It doesn't come from luxury and expensive trips and cars and toys and gifts that some parents do to compensate. It doesn't come from any of that. Self-trust in a child and resiliency comes from ongoing baseline psychological safety and predictability. Okay. So another way of looking at this is, how does harm happen? The spillover effect conflict parenting child. And this is a cascade of a domino effect, right? We have high conflict in co-parenting, anger, hostility, poor communication, vindictive, hijacking, manipulative, parental alienation. So that's what's happening here. It's happening first. There is the effect of that, which is elevated parental stress, because now the parent who is the target and the victim of the other parent's antagonistic behavior, they're going to have elevated stress responses. They are going to be hijacked. They are going to be exhausted. They're going to be confused, not knowing what to do in the situation. They will be the ones yelling at the child right before dinner simply because they are mentally exhausted. Mentally exhausted. There is nothing left there. We can't help someone from an empty cup. We have to have at least half full, right? Then the spillover of that is diminished parenting quality, like I said. So now that parent is less responsive, is less attuned, doesn't have access to their tools that theoretically they're there, but their prefrontal cortex is offline. The amygdala is highly activated. So the responsiveness is missing now. So the child doesn't have a buffer, right? The child outcome, last step in this domino effect, is there is no buffer for the child. Because in a high conflict co-parenting relationship, what do we typically have? Typically, we have a high conflict parent who is very intentional and strategic about creating ongoing conflict because they have mental health problems. Maybe they are diagnosed or undiagnosed. They could have narcissistic personality traits. They could be antagonistic, vindictive, angry, all of the above, right? Manipulative. So typically we have a high conflict parent, and then we have the more healthy parent. And that healthy parent wants to do what's right for their child. They're the child's lifesaver. But that healthier parent has limits in terms of mental abilities and exhaustion, right? So it's a very, very, very difficult triangle. And I do work with a lot of moms who are in this situation. Unfortunately, this is something that more women are being victimized than men. I'm not saying there are not men victimized by women in this antagonistic type of behavior, but it's more women than men, and it's very taxing. And nobody can sustain this long term. That's why if you're in this situation, you absolutely need help. You can't be in this alone. You need someone or a group of people who can sustain you while you're going through this until the situation gets stabilized. Okay, so when conflict is frequent, intense, and poorly resolved, the resulting stress spills into parenting, diminishing parental sensitivity and responsiveness to the child's need. This is from an article in the Journal of Child and Family Studies, published in 2026. Okay, another framework that you can look at this whole situation, it's the same idea, but another framework. We look at household chaos literally as a neurological hazard, okay? So what do we mean by household chaos? Disorganization, clutter, noise, lack of routine, and instability. frequent moves, shifting caregivers, what I said earlier. So what's being impacted when all of these destabilizing factors are present as an ongoing basis? Working memory decreases, right? Because executive function is not available to the child. Inhibitory control decreases. The ability to suppress automatic responses is compromised. So we see older siblings hitting younger siblings, or if you have an only child, all of a sudden your child may become the bully in the classroom, being very violent, very aggressive, and we don't know why. We take him to the doctor. Maybe a pill can solve it, right? But it doesn't. Cognitive flexibility, it's being impaired because the child is knocked out literally by this instability. And of course, parental responsiveness gets less and less because a parent is only a human. If they don't have support, if they don't have a supportive family, if they don't have extended family, if they are not going to therapy, if they don't have a parenting coach, if they are not going to a coaching support group every week or so, which are all things that I offer to my clients, by the way. So if you're doing this alone, of course, you are going to be a shell of a human, and that's normal because as human, we are very limited in our cognitive resources. There are a lot of studies. I won't read all the numbers on this slide because it's super technical, but there are a lot of studies that looked into impact of family conflict on academic achievement. And what we know is that hands down, both boys and girls are being impacted in math more than any other subject. So if your child is not doing well in school, and it could go beyond math, it can go into reading and science and creative arts and athletics. Please know, if you are coming out of a divorce and your child is doing less well than before in school, please, my only message with this slide is this: do not put pressure on your child to perform academically at an exceptional level. Do not guilt your child into performance. Do not shame your child into performance because he or she simply cannot do it. You have to stabilize your home environment. You have to go into a stable, settled co-parenting routine with your other parent. The child needs time to transition into this new family dynamic, going from one home to another. You need to be very smart and very wise when you decide on time sharing. How many days is a child in one home? How many days and nights is in the other home? I know parents who are not open to looking at the child's best interest, and they absolutely want their child to move homes every 2 or 3 days because it's my right. This is what I want, and that's how we're going to do it. And the other parent, after a year of negotiation, they have to sign that settlement because it's exhausting, it's expensive. So now you have a settlement agreement in which your child, maybe a 7-year-old, a 5-year-old, an 8-year-old, 9-year-old, every 2 or 3 nights, they switch homes. That is so taxing on the child. So all of these things play into academic achievement. If you are just transitioning and everybody's adjusting to the new timeshare, my timeline for parents is you have to give your child at least 1 to 2 years of adjustment with a lot of support that you're giving your child. Therapeutic group meetings, support groups, therapy, coaching, a lot of mindfulness tools. And after 2 years, you can start having different expectations for academic achievement. But in the middle of the conflict, this is not your priority, okay? You have to be the buffer for your child to do well in school as best as they can, but do not strive for performance. And again, do not guilt or shame your child. Okay. So what do teachers see in the classroom based on a 2021 article in the Journal of Divorce and Remarriage? 60 elementary teachers were interviewed. What do teachers see in the classroom? They see emotional impact, behavioral impact, social impact, and academic impact. What does emotional impact in the classroom means or looks like? Children show increased anxiety, sadness, and anger, chronic feelings of guilt and self-blame. Yes, children take the blame on themselves for the parental conflict. Emotional dysregulation, tantrums, outbursts, withdrawals. Okay, what is behavioral impact in the classroom? Behavioral disorders, well, aggression is not really a disorder. They see reduced classroom engagement or compliance, increased absenteeism or school avoidance, tardiness, inconsistencies. Of course, if the child has two co-parents with two homes and they're not communicating ethically and correctly with each other, the child is getting lost in between the two homes and school. What is the social impact that teachers see in the classroom? They see social withdrawal and peer isolation, reduced confidence and negative self-concept, difficulty trusting peers and the adults around them. What's the academic impact? Significant decline in test scores, like we saw earlier, lower motivation and lower task persistence, which means reduced focus and attention. This is where children get misdiagnosed with ADHD. Reduced cognitive development indicators. The existential impact on children. So I won't go too much into detail on this. This is very, this is a deep invitation for all of us to think about divorce as trauma. Okay. I want you to just remember that there are many different ways of defining trauma, looking at trauma, working with trauma, helping children with trauma. Divorce and parental separation is a traumatic event for the child. However, what that event is doing to the child depends on both parents. It's not the divorce, it's the conflict. I want you to remember that. There is acute trauma, chronic trauma, implicit trauma. This is from a 2020 article. Let's see what acute trauma is. When separation feels like a sudden shattering of everything the child believed to be permanent. The child's safe, predictable world disappears overnight. Loss of routine, loss of home, and loss of daily parental presence. So an acute trauma is when something happens suddenly. Chronic trauma is when conflict continues relentlessly. Every school pickup, every holiday becomes a battleground. The child is never not in survival mode. Hypervigilance becomes the baseline state of the child's nervous system. Very, very, very damaging to the child's brain development. Implicit trauma is when a child absorbs parent's unprocessed pain and begins replicating it in their own coping styles. This is frequently the developmental pathway through which parental alienation behaviors emerge. We'll dive deeper into this at another time. So, these children are not merely sad or anxious, and I'm quoting here, they are experiencing what existential therapists recognize as acute, chronic, or implicit trauma from this article in 2020. 4 core fears in high conflict parenting are safety, isolation, meaninglessness, and freedom or loss of control. Safety. The child's sense of physical and psychological protection collapses. The 2 people who are supposed to keep them safe are now in open warfare. Isolation. Loyalty conflicts force the child to silence their true experiences. They cannot be fully themselves in either home. We know situations when one parent is almost blackmailing the child, psychologically speaking, into not loving the other parent or showing open, direct, express, declared loyalty to one parent. Meaninglessness. The family, the child's primary source of meaning in the world, is fragmented. Now the child struggles to construct a coherent identity. And 4, loss of control and freedom. Nothing is predictable anymore. Rules, routines, relationships, they are all subject to change without notice. At the drop of a hat, when one of the 2 parents are going off the rail, the child exists in a state of permanent uncertainty and anxiety. This is how attachment science comes in. This is how insecure or disorganized attachment styles are now developing in that child. And the future adult is going to have a very hard time relating to another human being, sustaining a couple relationship or a friendship, or doing well in school, in college, in high school. So, what do we know about attachment theory? Very, very, very briefly. Children are neurobiologically wired to seek proximity to caregivers under threat. Secure attachment is a safe haven plus a secure base for exploration and learning. High conflict divorce disrupts availability for both attachment figures simultaneously or in parallel, and resulting insecure attachment styles, anxious and avoidant, become an internal working model applied to all future relationships. A study in 2026 looking at adolescents showed that both anxious and avoidant insecure attachment teenagers showed food addiction and eating disorders. This is when avoidant insecure attachment style to the mother, that was the outcome, food addiction and eating disorders. And avoidant attachment towards the fathers uniquely predicted food addiction. And we know from the parent-child connectedness study published in 2004, I know it's a long time ago, but it's as relevant as ever. We know that a strong parent-child connection is one of the most powerful protective factors against substance abuse and addiction, early sexual behavior and risky decisions, depression, suicidal ideation, and school dropout and academic disengagement. How children process interparental conflict. by showing hypervigilance. I already defined that many times. Behavioral dysregulation, acting out, aggression, withdrawal, internal representation. This is what we call self-image. The child forms a certain mental model of relationships as being dangerous, and this template is now carried on everywhere the child goes. Remember all those systems earlier? They now take the conflict model to school with their peers in the classroom, and then into larger societal interactions, and then ultimately who that person becomes. And there is an ongoing fear of abandonment, of course. When the child cannot maintain emotional security with either parent, existential terror emerges. This is an actual term in research, and it's existential terror. What that means is that the child now doesn't have a reference point, a lighthouse, a North Star, a base, an anchor. So without this anchor, which is typically the parents, or at a minimum one responsive parent, the child's nervous system has nothing that can reflect back at the child. There is no point of contact that the child can trust that it's always there to reflect an accurate image of reality. So the child's brain is like a leaf in the wind. And this is where the danger of delinquency, becoming attached to a peer group, that it's not so healthy, taking cues from older children. We call that peer attachment or peer orientation, because no human nervous system can be completely unattached. So if your child cannot develop safe attachment towards you or the other parent, they're going to find someone else. Because no human being, especially children, can live and survive in existential terror, which means I have no reference point. What's going to happen to me? Who am I? Where do I belong? Where is my place? So you have to be that lighthouse for your child. Hence, the title of my series, Be the One. It doesn't matter what the other parent does or doesn't do. We have to be the one consistently responsive parent. Okay. So let's summarize everything we just covered. Documented harms of ongoing interparental conflict are neurological, amygdala overactivation, prefrontal cortex suppressed, hippocampus volume reduced, self-regulation reduced. Academic, lower reading and math scores, disengagement from school activities, disinterest, failing, all of that. Emotional and psychological, anxiety, depression, PTSD-like symptoms, shame and guilt, and emotional dysregulation. Social, peer withdrawal, low self-esteem, difficulty trusting. They could fall victims of bullying. They could fall victims of predatory sexual abuse. And they will never tell you because you're not a safe parent. That's the risk. Attachment disruption across all relationships. Long-term impact are eating disorders, substance abuse, early sexual behavior, replication of conflict in adult partnerships, and existential, which means ongoing perceived loss of safety, isolation, lack of meaning for life, loss of control. These are all childhood trauma patterns. So again, documented harms of ongoing interparental conflict are neurological, academic, emotional and psychological, social, long-term, and existential. My message today is this: one responsive parent is enough. It's not ideal, but is enough. I want you to take on the challenge and the responsibility and the privilege of being the one responsive parent. The single most common factor for children who develop resilience is at least one stable and committed relationship with a supportive parent, caregiver, or adult. This is from the National Scientific Council on the Developing Child, published by Harvard in 2026. I quote again, resilience is ordinary magic. Ordinary available relational resources, when consistently present, are sufficient to protect children's development under extraordinary stress. This is from Ordinary Magic, Resilience Processes in Development, published in American Psychologist by Maston in 2001. And what one responsive parent provides is a neurologically safe haven where you are borrowing your regulated and attuned nervous system to your child's nervous system through what we call limbic resonance. That's how your child regulates him or herself. It's through your regulated presence. You provide a secure base for exploration, learning, and peer competence. You provide protection against the most severe long-term consequences of toxic stress, like mental health disorders, eating disorders, PTSD-like symptoms, medication, falling victim to other predators and abusers, things like that. And the single most powerful predictor of resiliency in child development research is at least one consistently responsive parent. Okay, we are at the end of our workshop. This is our last slide. I'm going to read it slowly. What are your key takeaways from today? What are you taking from everything I said today? Everything we learned here together. One, it's not the divorce, it's the ongoing conflict between parents that harms child development in the long term. Two, chronic interparental conflict meets the clinical definition of toxic stress. Three, every major brain system, such as prefrontal cortex, amygdala, and hippocampus, is affected by sustained conflict exposure. 4, the consequences are measurable. This is not an opinion, it's measurable. Academic, emotional, social, existential, and physical. And 5, one responsive, regulated parent is enough to change the trajectory of your child's life for the better. Be that one parent. Again, thank you so much for being here today. My name is Mihaela Plugarascio. I am a certified parent educator, a Florida Supreme Court certified family mediator. I am also a teacher for 30 years now. I am also a parent and a co-parent. Everything that I taught today, I've lived it, and I've also helped other parents with, most of them mothers. But I welcome dads. I wish I would have more fathers working with me or with other programs, because fathers are so, so, so important. I want you to please save the date for next week. Our workshop number 2 is coming up June 17 at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And next week, we're going to talk about your brain. Today, we talked about what happens in your child's brain and how all of this it's affecting him or her. And next week, we're going to talk about your brain, science-based tools to help you stay regulated, present, and emotionally available and responsive, even when the other parent is not, for whatever reasons. But I know you can be that one parent. Thank you, everyone. I'll see you next week. Bye.